Marmite and Vegemite are both eaten among the peoples in Britain and Australia. As they have a long and in-depth history, there have been plenty of discussions and even debates about Marmite versus Vegemite, and people have their own strong opinions on the topic, but there are plenty of facts that people don't actually readily know about these spreads. Marmite has Germanic origins. In the late 1800s, a German scientist by the name of Justus Liebig, through circumstances, began to experiment with yeast in the 1880s to be exact. Through research, the said yeast turned out to be edible, but nothing like the Marmite eaten today, and it was not until 1902 when this substance was turned into a spreadable food. Thus, the Marmite we all know and love, while wholly considered a British food, has completely Germanic origins. The name of Marmite. Marmite is actually a French word meaning casserole dish, as originally Marmite were served and sold in earthenware containers, and it was not until the 1920s when they were sold in the now iconic glass jars. La Marmite déposée is a type of fish stew originating from the northern French town Déposée. The recipe to make Marmite has not changed in a century. According to official sources, the methods and ingredients used to make Marmite has not changed in over 100 years. But in modern times, there have been scant claims that Marmite tastes slightly different, but these claims have never been technically or scientifically proven. How outsiders react to eating Marmite for the first time. With modern technology and information, it's easier than ever to try and learn about foreign foods. Plenty of people globally have eaten Marmite for the first time in the past few decades, and love it or hate it. It's generally recommended to first eat Marmite on toast or bread. Why? Because the taste is not for everyone. Originally, Marmite became popular with the British due to the types of food that the British people ate in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Some people who reportedly eat Marmite for the first time often mention that it's horrible. This comes in part due to the people eating a fundamentally different diet and not being able to ingest the spread as readily as the British. This mostly comes from people from outside the British Isles eating Marmite for the first time. Naturally, as a result of this, eating Marmite on bread makes the impact more bearable, as many have commented that this does work in terms of eating Marmite for the first time. White-colored Marmite. A particularly interesting theory is this. Some claim that if you were to take a dab of Marmite and put it onto a plate and repeatedly top the amount of Marmite, eventually it would turn completely white or at least slightly lighter in color from its basic dark hue. Though it's considered nothing but a story by some, there's actually scientific evidence that proves Marmite can actually be white in color or hue visibility. The BBC once did a study that examined Marmite and took records of it while being whipped, and at a microscopic level, the Marmite actually did change color, but the study did painstaking work to get the actual results and effects and appearance for the Marmite to change color. In normal circumstances, it's not necessarily possible to get white-colored Marmite, but it is true. White Marmite does exist. The amount of salt in Marmite. Historically, the amount of salt in Marmite has always been high, but due to the diet of the British people when it was first introduced, it was not of a real concern. However, in the 21st century and beyond, there is concern due to the oversaturation of modern British foods in high salt, sugar, and processed fats that Marmite is actually unhealthy. It's ironic that recent research as this puts the possibility of eating Marmite actually helping with diabetes and heart problems, but with the salt intake, it's potentially dangerous. So it's sort of a give and take. The New Zealand version. In New Zealand, there's actually a slight variation of Marmite, but it isn't nearly as popular or necessarily well known as the original Marmite or even Vegemite. This version made in New Zealand is supposedly to have a less quote-unquote tangy aftertaste when compared to the British version. Some have called the Kiwi version an easier version to eat, supposedly, when compared to the original Marmite. Marmite being used for alcohol in British prisons. In recent years, with reports coming from 2002 and 2009, Marmite was actually being used in prisons along with fermented fruit to create crude, rudimentary beers for inmates to drink in prisons. As a result of these claims, Marmite were later banned from being served in British prisons to avoid this illegal fermented alcohol, the Marmite. Continuing on the concept of drinking Marmite, you can actually add a teaspoon of the spread to a cup of hot water, sit, stir, eventually the substance will dissolve into the water and you can drink like tea. The Australian version of Marmite. The Australian version of Vegemite actually came about during the First World War, where British shipments of Marmite were disrupted because of the global conflict. Later on, an Australian came up with their own version of a spreadable yeast substance. The name of Vegemite actually comes from a nationwide competition, as Vegemite was randomly chosen, then sold officially in Australia in the year of 1923. 21 years after Marmite was first sold officially in Britain in the year of 1902. Vegemite was owned by an American company for 82 years. Soon after Vegemite was created and sales started to rise in Australia, one of the creators of Vegemite paired up with American businessman Kraft to establish what we now know as the Kraft Foods Company. In 1935, Vegemite was officially sold to Kraft Foods and remained under American ownership until 2017. Vegemite was the first electronically scanned item in Australian supermarkets. In 1984, a then 66-cent jar of Vegemite became the first product scanned at checkout in Australia at a Woolworths. Vegemite is banned in some Australian jails. Much like the British claims of Marmite alcohol, Vegemite is also banned in some jails due to inmates attempting to use in part of the food substance to make liquor. Claims come as recent from Australia in 2007. Vegemite is scientifically proven to help with hangovers. Due to the composition of the Vegemite formula, the B vitamins are important for energy production, metabolism, and blood sugar control. Eating Vegemite can help with how quickly you can recover from possibly drinking too much alcohol in prior days. Vegemite can work as a cleaning substance. According to some, due to the ingredients of the Vegemite, it's said to have naturally occurring antibacterial properties, which means it can be technically used to disinfect or clean anything from kitchen cutting boards to pots and pans. Marmite versus Vegemite. The debate of Marmite versus Vegemite has often gone back and forth between Britain and Australia, but the fact of the matter is that when people discuss the positives and negatives about the debate, more often than not, it can be about personally based assumptions of their own interpretations of the spreads. What has been considered fact are these truths. Marmite is actually easier to spread than Vegemite, which can increase the types of ways it can be eaten or paired with different sorts of foods. Vegemite is actually considered to be slightly stronger in terms of taste when compared to Marmite, due to the original Australian composition of the recipe when making the yeast spread. Marmite is known throughout the Anglo-speaking world. Vegemite is known mostly in Australia and a few other countries in the South Pacific region.